So we talked a little bit about caring for all the different pocket pets that we talked about, and now we're actually going to talk about how we care for the birds in our lives. So really you want to start with a healthy bird. This will really cut down on any management problems you're going to have. Proper management means a couple different things, but most importantly it means a good environment for your bird. So the location of the cage needs to be out of direct sunlight. You want to make sure there's no drafts, and you want to make sure that it's in a place that's got a constant temperature to it. You don't want a whole bunch of temperature fluctuation. And you also want to make sure that they can't get to anything hazardous like poisonous plants, other pets, that sort of thing. So birds need to be in a dry, warm, draft-free place. Birds can get stressed pretty easily, so if you can really prevent that and subject them to as little stress as possible, you're good. You really don't want a whole bunch of other animals around. That doesn't typically work out well. They tend to stress the bird out. If you have multiple birds and you're going to be introducing them to other birds, you want to make sure that you quarantine them and observe them for about 3 to 4 weeks before you introduce them to anybody else. And sanitation is extremely important. You want to make sure that you're providing fresh food and water. You want to make sure that their perches and cages are kept clean. And you can actually bathe them and spray them down regularly. This helps reduce any feather dust and dirt and also cuts down on mites. So small birds like budgies, canaries, finches, the talking myna, lories, and cockatiels prefer to bathe in a container, kind of like a bird bath. You can just put a container in the cage at regular intervals for about 30 minutes and then pull it back out. Larger birds need to be sprayed with a fine mist from like a plant sprayer. This mist really needs to be allowed to kind of filter down onto the bird. You don't want to spray it directly on the bird. They don't need to be saturated, but you need to just gently spray them off about 2 or 3 times a week. Proper management also means caring for the bird and observing for signs of stress. Overgrown claws can result in injury if they become entangled in the wire cage. Claws can be clipped with just pet nail clippers, like you would clip either your dog's toenails or another pocket pet's nails. You really want to make sure that you're taking care to avoid the pinkish streak in the center of the claw. That's the quick. It's a blood vessel, and if you nick that, not only will it bleed a lot, but it will also be very painful for the bird. Birds that are living indoors need either regular bathing or spraying to encourage preening, but avoid feather plucking. So over here on the right, this parrot right here or macaw, I'm sorry, has really just plucked his little feathers out, poor guy. Feather plucking can result from boredom, from a bad diet, if they need a mate, or a lack of bathing. Preening is the process that the bird goes through when it's cleaning and trimming its feathers with its beak, but not yanking them out. All right, feather plucking is when they're yanking them out. So these are the types of actions that you need to take if you notice that your bird is showing signs of illness or feather fluffing. Feather fluffing can be caused by stress, or it can be caused by being too cold. So you want to make sure that your cage temperature is maintained somewhere between 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If it is not, you can move the cage to a warmer location. You can also adjust the temperature of the cage with a light bulb or a heating pad. The heating pad can be placed underneath the cage. You want to provide about 2 or 3 perches so that the bird can find the most comfortable temperature, whether that be close to the bottom or closer to the top. You can also partially cover the cage to prevent drafts, and you can provide quick energy fluids like sugar water, honey water, or orange juice. Proper management also means the proper housing and equipment for the bird, and this varies for the size and the nature of the bird. So perches, so what the birds actually sit on. So the size and the style of the perch depends on the type of bird you have. Most store-bought cages come with hard plastic perches, and they can actually be uncomfortable for birds. If birds refuse to perch, you can replace those plastic ones with wood ones that are more natural, more like a tree branch. Larger birds like larger perches. Makes sense, right? And smaller birds like smaller perches. The perch for a parrot-type bird needs to be replaced because what happens is these birds end up destroying the wood perches just because they're so big and their claws are so strong. And they will actually pick at them with their beak as well. So the good news with this is that the bad news is obviously you have to replace your perch, but the good news is that the bird exercises its beak and stays busy in the process, which helps cut down on that feather plucking. Limbs and tree branches make very good natural perches, but you need to make sure that they are free of mold and any pesticide residue. You don't want them to be kind of nasty already. Tapered perches work very well because they give a bird the choice of the most comfortable perching spot. All right, so water and feed containers. Water containers need to be hard and easy to clean. Things like glass, ceramic, or stainless steel work well. You want to make sure that you're using a gravity type waterer that hangs outside the cage with either a metal spout or a tube extending into the cage. That works very well. Feed containers can be plastic for smaller birds, but for larger, like parrot type birds, they need the same type of material that's used for their watering containers. Most birds eat one of three things: seed, fruit, and or nectar. The vast majority of birds have a seed diet, and it can consist of one or two types. Cereal seeds and oil seeds are the two types we're going to talk about. So cereal seeds have a higher content of carbohydrates as compared to oil seeds. Examples of cereal seeds would be canary seed, millet, corn, and dehusked oat kernels, whereas oil seeds are higher in fat content than cereal seed and lower in carbohydrate. So examples of this would be sunflower, peanuts, safflower, pine nuts, rape, they are actually called rape seeds, maw, niger, and linseed. So seed is usually bought in a commercial pelleted or pre-mixed ration, sorry, not pelleted, but pre-mixed of cereal and oil seeds. So there's actually going to be a combination of both. And typically this is formulated for certain bird species. So there might be like a parrot type feed and a budgie feed, that sort of thing. So you'll buy the feed that works best for your species of bird. It provides two things: a balanced diet, and also variety, so your bird doesn't get bored. Sorry. Seed needs to be free of dust, dirt, and it needs to be dry. If it's not dry, it can actually mold. You never want to feed moldy seed. You wouldn't eat moldy food, so don't make your bird. If you're using peanuts, they're very susceptible to mold. Seed can be soaked in 24 hours in warm water for young birds that might have difficulty cracking the seed with their beak until they're fully developed. You can also do this for birds during the breeding and molting season. So soaking does a couple different things. It stimulates germination, which actually causes a chemical change that increases the protein content of the seeds. So your bird ends up getting more protein out of it. Before you feed the soaked seed, you want to rinse them in tap water and make sure that they're not moldy, and that they don't contain any fungi that can obviously hurt your bird. If your bird does not eat the seed within a few hours, you want to take it out, you want to throw it away. And you need to clean your container before you feed more soaked seed. This helps cut down on your risk of mold. Other materials that you can feed your birds: green plant material. So examples of this would be things like carrot tops, chickweed, and dandelion leaves. You can feed kale and spinach, but only in moderation. Too much green plant material can actually cause diarrhea. You want to avoid lettuce. It doesn't really have any nutritional value for birds, so you're not really doing them any good. You want to make sure if you are feeding green plant material that you are washing it to make sure there's no pesticide residue left. That can cause some issues. And you want to make sure that you're feeding green plant material after it's warmed to room temperature. So if you're feeding things that you would typically keep in the refrigerator, you want to kind of pull it out of the refrigerator and let it sit for a little while, let it come up to room temperature, and then feed it to your bird. Grit is needed in a bird's diet at all times, with the exception of mynah birds. Mynah birds don't need it. But Grit actually aids the ventriculus in grinding up food. So birds have no teeth, so their digestive system has to chew the food for them, essentially. And they have an organ that does that for them, and that's why you need to add grit to their diet to make sure that they're getting that and their digestive system is supported that way. There's two different types. There's soluble and there's insoluble. Soluble are things like oyster shells, and that breaks down and is a really good source of minerals. And then there's insoluble, things like crushed granite, and crushed granite actually provides the base for food to rub and work against to be ground up. Cuttlefish bone, which is basically a marine mollusk, provides a source of calcium and can be readily eaten by larger birds. Smaller birds will need it to be shaved or chipped, but bigger birds can just eat it whole. Cuttlefish bone is particularly useful to female birds who need calcium for egg production. So exceptions to the seed feed are mynas and lories and lorikeets. Myna birds typically require more care than other birds, mainly because their diet includes fruit that has to be cleaned from their cage every day. Their diet does not include seeds, grit, or cuttlefish at all. You can get soft bill pellets or foods from the pet store. They will eat that. You can also get fruit for them, things like apple slices, grapes, orange slices, and banana. You can also use dried fruit. And then mealworms. So mealworms are a live food that can also be fed to mynas. Lories and lorikeets are nectar and pollen eaters. So you can actually get powdered nectar that's available from the pet store and mix it with water and they'll eat that. You can also feed them fruit. As far as care for birds, hand-reared birds really are in high demand because they're more tame. They've been raised since they were a baby by humans. Hand feeding requires that newly hatched birds need to be fed every hour and a half. It's a very intensive process. When birds approach weaning, they can be fed once about every 3 or 4 hours, but that does still include through the night, so you're not getting a whole lot of sleep. Feeding needs to take place from early morning to early evening. You can feed dry baby cereals, fruits, and canned baby food. And that canned baby food, all these things can be mixed in water, blended, and then heated to like a somewhat runny state. And they'll be fed that way. As far as handling and training, you want to allow your bird to adjust to a new location for 2 or 3 days before you try and handle them. And you want to make sure that you're offering them treats at regular intervals until it will take the treat through the open door of the cage. That'll help them kind of get used to you and get used to their environment. You can press a stick perch up against the bird's chest, just above the legs, and that actually encourages them to step out on it. And then once the bird is comfortable in their environment and comfortable with that process, you can substitute a finger or a hand for your bird to perch on. If you have a larger bird, you might need leather gloves that will use their beak to climb onto their perch, and if they dig their beak into your hand, it hurts. Clipping their wings. So this is a practice that is used when a bird is left out of a cage. Clipping the wings restricts their ability to fly, also helps prevent escape. It is a painless procedure, and basically all you're doing is you're cutting the primary and secondary flight feathers just above the base of the feather shaft. If you cut down into the feather shaft, it's very similar to trimming a dog's nails too short. You'll hurt them and they'll end up bleeding. And then the 2 outer primary flight feathers are left purely for aesthetic purposes. You can clip them as well if you really want to. Budgies, cockatiels, parrots, macaws, cockatoos, and mynas can be taught to talk. Young male birds are typically the best learners and the easiest to teach. You want to remove any distractions like mirrors, toys, and feed when you're training them. The same person does need to work with the bird on a regular basis. Typically, women and children are better trainers. They're just more patient. Lessons should be given about the same time every day, and you want to limit the length to about 15 minutes. And you want to start with short phrases and words and then slowly repeat them. That's all I've got for you. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Otherwise, thanks for watching.